It started as a house fire in the quiet suburb of Westfield, New Jersey. Flames tore through the small, two-story home of 42-year-old accountant Ellen Parker, a well-liked neighbor with no known enemies. By the time firefighters arrived, the blaze had eaten away most of the kitchen and living room, leaving only charred remains and the sickening scent of burnt fabric and melted plastic. Neighbors stood in shock, wrapped in coats despite the warm spring evening. They whispered theories, maybe a faulty stove, maybe an electrical short. But those murmurs died instantly when the fire crew wheeled out a stretcher, and everyone caught sight of the black body bag. Ellen hadn't died in her sleep. She had been murdered. The autopsy revealed two critical details. 1. Ellen had been struck in the head, hard, before the fire started. 2. The fire was intentionally set, likely to destroy evidence. To investigators, it was clear this wasn't just arson. It was murder, wrapped in fire to erase a crime. But in the ruins of Ellen's home, they found something they didn't expect. Something singed, crumpled, and halfway turned to ash, a receipt. The paper was blackened around the edges, the ink smudged, but parts of it were still legible. And what was written there didn't make sense. It wasn't from a grocery store or hardware shop. It was from a high-end pawn shop in Newark, dated 2 days before Ellen's death. The receipt listed a single, expensive item. Diamond necklace, $14,500 cash. But Ellen didn't own any diamond necklace. And Ellen's friends swore she hated flashy jewelry. The receipt became the first crack in the killer's story. And once detectives started pulling at that thread, everything began to unravel. Detective Laura Klein, a seasoned investigator with 18 years on the force, knew pawn shops often held stories criminals didn't mean to tell. When she arrived at Gold Standard Pawn and Loan, she was already suspicious. Inside, the air smelled faintly of metal polish and cigarette smoke. Behind the glass counter, the shop's owner, a heavy-set man named Rick DeLuca, greeted her with the kind of friendliness that made it clear he'd seen enough cops to know how to talk to them. "Yes, I remember her," he said, after Klein slid the receipt across the counter. Lady came in, mid-40s, brown hair, business clothes. Said she needed quick cash. Rick pulled up the store's security footage. There she was, Ellen Parker, or someone who looked almost exactly like her. Same height, same hair color, same build. But the timestamp showed 8:42 p.m., and Ellen's friends swore she was at a local charity dinner that entire evening. The woman in the video didn't speak much. She kept her head slightly down, sunglasses covering her eyes, handing over the necklace for cash. Rick remembered she seemed nervous, tapping her nails against the counter. The most important clue: she didn't leave alone. In the footage, after collecting her envelope of cash, the woman walked out with a man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. The pawn shop cameras didn't catch his face, but they caught something else, the license plate of his car. It was registered to Brian Ellis, Ellen Parker's ex-boyfriend. Brian Ellis lived in a cramped one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. When detectives knocked, he answered shirtless, smelling faintly of whiskey despite it being barely 10 a.m. Brian and Ellen had broken up 3 years earlier, and the relationship had been rocky at best. Neighbors reported frequent shouting, slammed doors, and one occasion where police were called, but no charges were filed. When asked about the pawn shop, Brian leaned against the doorway, smirking. "Yeah, I took a friend there," he admitted. "But it wasn't Ellen. You think I'm stupid enough to pawn her stuff?" The woman in the video, according to Brian, her name was Marissa Tate, a mutual acquaintance. She needed quick money, and he gave her a ride. He claimed he had no idea about the necklace's origin. Detective Klein didn't buy it. Something about Brian's tone, his casual shrugging, felt rehearsed. When she pressed him on Ellen's death, Brian's demeanor changed. "Look, I didn't kill her. I haven't seen Ellen in months," he said. But his eyes darted away when he said it. That receipt was tying him to the days before Ellen's murder, and he knew it. Before leaving, Klein noticed something. On Brian's kitchen counter sat an expensive leather wallet. The kind you don't usually find in a man living above a laundromat. A gold-embossed logo inside read, "Caldwell and Sons Fine Goods," the same brand that sold the necklace Ellen supposedly pawned. Detectives tracked down Marissa Tate, the woman Brian claimed had pawned the necklace. She was 29, with a string of petty theft charges and a reputation for running scams. Marissa initially denied everything. She'd never met Ellen Parker and barely knew Brian. But when confronted with the pawn shop footage, her bravado cracked. "Okay," she admitted, "I pawned the necklace." But Brian said it belonged to his cousin. Said she needed cash fast but didn't want her name on the papers. Marissa claimed Brian had given her $500 for the favor. She didn't ask questions. She just signed the slip, took the cash from the clerk, and left. But here's the problem. The necklace had been reported stolen, 3 weeks earlier, from a wealthy widow living 2 towns over. This meant 2 things. 1. Ellen Parker was somehow connected to a stolen necklace worth $14,500. 2. Someone went to extreme lengths to make it look like Ellen had pawned it. Detective Klein started forming a theory. Maybe Ellen had discovered the theft. Maybe she'd confronted the wrong person. The question was, who wanted her dead badly enough to frame her for it? The widow, Agnes Hollingsworth, lived in a sprawling estate filled with antiques and family heirlooms. She was furious about the theft, describing the necklace as the last gift from my late husband. The break-in at her home had been strangely precise. No forced entry, nothing else stolen, just the necklace. Agnes suspected an insider, possibly a house cleaner or handyman. But the most curious detail was the timeline. Her necklace had vanished 3 weeks before Ellen's death. Detectives compared notes and realized Ellen had been Agnes's accountant for nearly 5 years. She'd visited the Hollingsworth estate at least twice in the month before the theft. Could Ellen have discovered financial irregularities linked to the stolen necklace? Or had someone wanted it to appear that way? Then came a breakthrough. A local hardware store's security footage showed Brian Ellis purchasing lighter fluid, gloves, and matches, exactly 2 days before Ellen's murder. When confronted, Brian claimed it was for a camping trip. But camping gear. Not a single piece in his apartment. The burned receipt was beginning to look like more than a mistake. It was a piece of evidence someone had tried to destroy but failed. While combing through Ellen's bank statements, Klein found something odd. 2 days before she died, Ellen withdrew $9,000 in cash, an amount completely out of character for her. Friends said Ellen was frugal, almost to a fault. She used credit cards for everything, tracked every cent in spreadsheets, and hated carrying more than $50 in her wallet. So why suddenly take out such a large sum? Security camera footage from the bank showed Ellen at the teller window, looking tense. She kept glancing over her shoulder, as if afraid someone was watching. Even stranger, minutes after Ellen left the bank, Brian's car appeared in the parking lot. He didn't go inside. He simply idled for a few minutes, then drove off in the same direction Ellen had taken. It was starting to look like Ellen had been coerced. That $9,000 might have been hush money, or a ransom of sorts. Detectives wondered, had Ellen been blackmailed over the stolen necklace? And had she decided to confront the blackmailer, only to end up dead? Ellen's best friend, Julia Carr, revealed something detectives didn't know. A week before the murder, Ellen had called her in tears, saying, "I made a mistake, and now they want money." When Julia pressed for details, Ellen shut down. She wouldn't name they. Detective Klein began piecing it together. Ellen, an accountant with access to high-net-worth clients, may have stumbled across stolen assets, or been tricked into moving them. Someone realized she knew too much and decided to silence her. And the pawn shop receipt. It wasn't just about stolen jewelry, it was a paper trail. If burned completely, the connection between Brian, Marissa, and the necklace might have vanished. But whoever set the fire didn't expect it to survive, partially charred, but still readable. Klein had a gut feeling Ellen's murder wasn't impulsive. It was planned, calculated, and rooted in money. When investigators re-examined the pawn shop footage, they noticed something they had missed the first time, a reflection in the glass display case. The reflection showed part of the man's face, Brian Ellis, no baseball cap covering his features. And in his hand, Ellen's distinctive leather-bound planner. That planner was never recovered from her burned home. The footage gave detectives enough to bring Brian in for questioning again, this time with Marissa's testimony ready to contradict him. But Brian didn't fold. He doubled down, claiming Ellen had given him the planner for safekeeping. His smirk suggested he still believed they couldn't touch him. What he didn't know was that detectives had a new lead. Ellen's financial records showed a wire transfer to an offshore account linked to a name Brian had used before. The account in the Cayman Islands was under the alias David Cole, but investigators linked it to Brian via a rental agreement he had signed 2 years earlier. The deposit, exactly $14,500, the same value as the pawned necklace. The date, 3 days before Ellen's murder. This suggested Brian had orchestrated the theft, used Marissa to pawn the necklace, then funneled the money offshore. But there was still a gap. How did Ellen get pulled into it? And why kill her instead of just intimidating her? Klein suspected Ellen might have been planning to expose him, and that the $9,000 she withdrew was meant to buy herself safety. If that was true, the plan failed, because Brian decided she was too much of a risk to keep alive. Cell phone records painted the final picture. On the night of Ellen's death, Brian's phone pinged near her house at 8:15 p.m., just 20 minutes before neighbors reported seeing smoke. A witness, previously too scared to speak, came forward. She had seen a man matching Brian's description leaving Ellen's house in a hurry, carrying what looked like a gas can. The fire investigators confirmed the blaze started in two separate locations, living room and kitchen, meaning it had been deliberately set to spread quickly. The blow to Ellen's head, likely from a fireplace poker, found melted in the debris. But the most chilling detail came from the coroner. Ellen was still alive when the fire started. The burned receipt was the killer's mistake. Without it, the pawn shop link, the necklace's trail, and the financial transactions might have been lost forever. Brian thought fire could erase the truth. Instead, it exposed him. Armed with the pawn shop footage, financial records, and eyewitness testimony, detectives moved in. Brian Ellis was arrested at 6:32 a.m. outside his apartment. He didn't resist. He just stared at the officers, almost daring them to make the charges stick. In the interview room, Brian leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "You've got nothing but guesses," he said. But the detectives laid out the evidence piece by piece. The pawn shop receipt linking him to Marissa. The stolen necklace traced to his offshore account. The gas sighting and lighter fluid purchase. Cell phone records placing him at Ellen's home. For the first time, Brian's smirk faded. Still, he refused to confess. Prosecutors knew the physical evidence was enough to proceed. But they wanted the full story, especially about Marissa Tate's involvement. Faced with charges of accessory to murder, Marissa broke. She told detectives Brian had approached her weeks earlier with the pawn shop plan. He needed someone to act as Ellen to sell the necklace. Marissa said she didn't know the necklace was stolen until after the fact. But by then, she was in too deep. Brian had threatened to pin the theft on her if she didn't cooperate further. The night Ellen died, Marissa claimed Brian called her in a panic. "It's done," he said. "I had to. She was going to ruin everything." Marissa also revealed a chilling detail. Brian had once bragged that he could make a body and every trace of it disappear in under an hour. This statement helped prosecutors argue premeditation. The trial opened in a packed courtroom, with Ellen's family seated in the front row. The prosecution painted Brian as a manipulative opportunist, willing to eliminate anyone who threatened his schemes. They presented the burned receipt as the turning point, the clue that tied every other piece of evidence together. The defense argued there was no direct proof Brian killed Ellen, suggesting instead that Marissa might have acted alone. But this theory was undermined by the cell tower data and the witness who saw Brian leaving Ellen's house. Each day, more details emerged about Brian's financial desperation, gambling debts, unpaid loans, and a pattern of targeting women with valuable connections. Witnesses recalled Ellen in the days before her death. She seemed distracted, avoiding eye contact, and once whispered to Julia Carr, "I think I'm being followed." Her last phone call was to a client at 7:58 p.m. the night she died. Investigators believe she ended that call just before Brian arrived at her door. Neighbors testified to hearing muffled voices, then a loud thud. Minutes later, smoke began rising from the windows. The jury was visibly moved when photos of Ellen's life, her work, her charity involvement, her close bond with her niece, were shown alongside images of the burnt-out home. Forensic accountants testified about the offshore account, explaining how the stolen necklace's value matched the exact deposit Brian made. They also revealed another troubling link. Small transfers from multiple accounts Ellen managed had been funneled into the same offshore account over the previous year. This suggested Brian had been exploiting Ellen's position as an accountant for months. She may have discovered the fraud and decided to act, only to be silenced. The prosecution argued that the $9,000 Ellen withdrew was either intended as a payoff or part of a failed attempt to negotiate her safety. Brian's attorney tried to cast doubt on the evidence, claiming the pawn shop receipt was planted and that the reflection in the footage was too unclear to prove it was Brian. They emphasized that no fingerprints or DNA conclusively tied him to the murder weapon. However, the combination of circumstantial evidence, witness testimony, and financial records proved difficult to shake. The jury seemed particularly unmoved by Brian's lack of remorse, noting his cold demeanor throughout the proceedings. When Marissa took the stand, she admitted her role in pawning the necklace and confirmed Brian's threats against her. She described the fear she felt after Ellen's death, convinced Brian might turn on her next. "He told me once that money was the only thing worth protecting," she said, "and that people were replaceable." Her testimony, while self-serving, provided a narrative that matched the prosecution's timeline and explained the movements captured on surveillance. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for just 6 hours. Brian Ellis was found guilty of first-degree murder, arson, theft, and fraud. Marissa Tate received a reduced sentence for cooperation, serving time for her role in the pawn shop deception and obstruction of justice. As the judge read the verdict, Ellen's sister held back tears. For her family, the trial's outcome brought justice, but not closure. In the months following the trial, the pawn shop receipt was placed in the evidence archive, marked with a note, recovered partially burned, critical to case. Detective Klein reflected on how such a small, fragile piece of paper had unraveled a calculated crime. Without it, the chain of events might never have been fully connected. The case became a training example for new detectives, demonstrating the value of examining every scrap of evidence, no matter how damaged. Ellen Parker's story is a reminder of how greed can turn deadly and how small clues can speak louder than any alibi. For viewers, it's a call to stay vigilant. Financial crimes often hide deeper dangers, and sometimes the most ordinary documents can uncover the darkest truths. If you believe someone is being coerced, threatened, or drawn into a dangerous situation, speak up. Your awareness could save a life.